Hey everybody, it looks like we are streaming live at the Potter's House page. This is a very exciting evening for me. I'm
No,
Sean
not yet,
Murphy.
not yet. Sorry, it's still.
Oh, it says it's now streaming. Okay,
Now it's good.
now it's good. Okay, I think we're live. Hello everybody. Welcome to this special event. I'm really excited about it. We're live at the Potter's House Facebook page. I'm Sean Murphy. I'm the executive director of 1455. If you're not familiar with me or us and what we do, we're a nonprofit art organization, and we're building a community of writers virtually through programs like this, our annual summer literary festival, and eventually we will be opening a year-round writers retreat in Winchester, Virginia. To learn more about the community of writers we're building and welcoming, I invite you to check us out at 1455litarts.org. And one of the other things that we've had a lot of fun doing is partnering with kindred spirits within the community, the Potter's House being one of them. And this is another opportunity for us to collaborate with DC's historic Potter's House. Lee, who directs that amazing places here, I'm going to allow her to introduce herself, the Potter's House and their mission, and then we'll introduce our special guest this evening. So Lee, why should I introduce you when you can introduce yourself? Take it away and tell us all about what you guys do.
Fair enough. Thank you, Sean. This is so fun. Welcome, everybody. I'm so excited about this evening. And I will just say that it's a mutual admiration society between the Potter's House and 1455 Literary Arts. We're so thrilled to be in this partnership. I'm Lee Tivell. I'm the executive director here at the Potter's House, and we are delighted to have you all here and to welcome Diane Zinna. And we are just so grateful for the partnerships that have brought us all together tonight. For those of you who don't already know the Potter's House well, welcome. And for those who are old friends, we're glad you're back. For those who are newer to the Potter's House, we are a nonprofit social enterprise. We are a bookstore, a cafe, and event space, and we've been part of the Adams Morgan community since 1960. So this is our 60th year of hospitality and service. And throughout that whole time, we have been a hub for conversation and action and activism and creative expression and community transformation. And I will just say, you know, this is quite a time that we're in, and we are navigating it the best we can. And we're continuing to serve food and coffee and drinks and books, but we're also not letting go of what's at our core, which is our role as a community connector, a place where meaningful dialogue can still happen, and a place where everyone who enters feels welcome. And for us in this pandemic, I will say that's become even more important. The interactions that we have in the shop and online that we have become even more precious to us. And we have continued our commitment to hospitality. And just to give you one example of that, through our Pay It Forward program, we gave away 800 free meals last month to neighbors who would otherwise have gone hungry. That is unprecedented. And it's just a manifestation of our commitment to hospitality, and it's one that we intend to continue. And so are gatherings like this. And so while we can't gather in person, I wish you were all in the cafe tonight, surrounded by books and old wood tables. We can't do that in person, but we're still working hard to find ways to bring folks together. And tonight is one of those opportunities. I just also want to add that we're especially thrilled to have Diane with us this evening because we have a special connection with this author. She has a long history with the Potter's House and with the Church of the Savior, the network of faith communities that launched and have supported the Potter's House for all of our 60 years. So when she reached out to tell us about the publication of the All Night Sun, we knew we needed to plan a community event, and we're so glad that 1455 was willing to play with us. Last thing I'll just say is that we have copies of Diane's beautiful book available at the Potter's House if you want to come in and grab one, or you can have it delivered to your door through our partners at bookshop.org. If you click on the link to our Facebook page for this event, there is a link that will take you directly to the place where you can buy the All Night Sun online. I will tell you from personal experience that once you read the first chapter, you will be irresistibly drawn to this story. You will not be able to put it down. So I will let you guys take it away from here. Diane, thank you so much for being here. And Sean, thanks so much for guiding the conversation.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thank you so much, Lee. And I'll add that of course, it's always a pleasure to work with you, but it's also an honor and to be it partners with a place like the Potter's House is everything that 1455 is about. So this is real special. And folks, those of you that are going to 1455 to check out some of our offerings, many of our events starting this summer have links to Potter's House. So please purchase your books and support independent bookstores. Definitely buy Diane's book, duh, but you can also buy a lot of books from our Lit Fest this summer. Quick and easy links. So Lee, thank you so much for your sponsorship and partnership. Let's get this show on the road. This is a pretty special week because for me, it's a blessing that Diane is not sick of me yet. This is the third time in a week that she and I have shared screen space, and I will say it's been delightful. We had an event together last week for George Mason's Fall for the Book. We conducted a 1455 interview yesterday, and now the grand main event, which I'm really looking forward to, and I know you're going to enjoy this. So I will stop talking. Let me introduce our author, and then she's going to do a short reading, and then we're going to ask some questions and encourage you that are watching the stream to send in your questions because we'll try to answer them if we can. So our author tonight, Diane Zinna, is originally from Long Island, New York. She received her MFA from the University of Florida and taught creative writing for 10 years. She was the executive co-director at the AWP, which is the Association of Writers in Writing Programs, and they put on the largest literary conference in North America every year. In 2014, she created the Writer to Writer Mentorship Program, helping to match more than 600 writers over 12 seasons. She lives in Fairfax, Virginia with her husband and daughter. The All Night Sun is her first book and has been longlisted for the Center of Fiction's first novel prize. Congratulations for that. And thank you, Diane, for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I am so not tired of you, Sean. I've been having so much fun with you this past week, and I am elated. I just have tingles all over my body because I'm doing this with Potter's House tonight, especially. My family has a long history with Potter's House in DC. I was telling Lee and Sean before we got started that my husband is a local folk singer, and he used to run the music nights at Potter's House. And so I would go like a little fan and watch him perform. His name is Blair Pettyjohn, and some people might remember him from those music nights. And now it's my chance. You know, he's watching in the other room, and I just feel just like it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. So I think that it'd be both appropriate and special for you to kick it off with a little taste of, well, you're going to read something from a publication. So maybe tee it up for us and then read away.
Right. So I'm going to read something a little bit different tonight. I'm going to read something that I wrote for Monkey Bicycle, which is an online mag. And they have a fantastic series called About My Book. And it's a way for authors to talk about their writing and their books in really weird ways, but I think it gets to the heart of everything that's in the All Night Sun, and I think it'll be really fun to read to you. So let me go ahead and do that.
Please do.
All right, I'm reading it from my screen, so it might be weird with where I'm looking, but here we go. If the All Night Sun were awake, it is my father's, and I'm 15, there with my teenage friends. We break away and go down into the funeral home's basement and sneak into the showroom where they sell the caskets lined with satin that my family couldn't afford. My friends put their feet up on the flower print sofas, open the drawers to end tables, find straight pins and make jokes. This is what they use to pin the eyes closed. If the All Night Sun were a voice, it's my Long Island accent that my friends shed first because they could afford out-of-state schools. If the All Night Sun were a spray of coffin flowers, it's chrysanthemums, because they are the least expensive. They turn brown around the edges the fastest, usually before the service is even over. If the All Night Sun were a meal shared with family, it's a cold cuts platter handed to you during break time at the funeral home that you carry home on your lap in the passenger seat, the saran wrap sticking to your tights. You put it on your dining room table and your aunt and cousins gather around to criticize it and the fact the coffin was closed. They say, why couldn't you even put his picture on top of the casket? They take all the seats around the table and you and your mother eat ham rolls off of paper plates in the living room with the TV set turned off. It's a question. What if you dove into the water and came out blue? What if you made love in the grass and turned green? Sat out in the all-night sun and turned orange, just stayed that way. I have stayed that way. If the all-night sun were a taste, it's salt, licorice, and long ropes. Chocolate bars mixing with the taste of lake water after a swim. Sticky marshmallow candy making you sticky all over. If the all-night sun were a crematory, it's the kind that sends home ashes in a plastic bag inside a cardboard box, a box that would be discarded in a hotel lobby, trash can at a popular family resort. I've stopped telling people which one. They are always too shocked. If the all-night sun were the beach, it's that time that you stopped for water pills at the supermarket before meeting with friends. If the all-night sun were a country, it's not this one. If it were a school, it's the kind that closes for plagues. If it were a bird, it's one that sits so long on a branch outside your kitchen window, it makes you Google bird omens. If the all-night sun were an urn, it's brass and it's sealed like a metal football dropped in a lake. You can't remember if it was inscribed with your last name or had those peely sticker letters that would have washed away by now with all the tides and whatnot. If the all-night sun was a cacophony, it would be the crowd of people shouting that something has rolled up on the sand here that looks like a metal football. If the all-night sun were a closet, it's a mouth. If the all-night sun were a monster, it's that luminous horse that appears beside lakes. Children cannot resist jumping on its back, and it stretches its back longer and longer to accommodate more and more children, and then it jumps into the water and dives to the bottom. If it were a crown of flowers, it's one long drifting on the sea, discovered on another shore, maybe by you. If the all-night sun were a meal eaten alone, it's at Subway in black clothes where the sandwich artist rolls their eyes at me and I say that I just came from a funeral to make them feel sorry. I don't tell them that the funeral was 10 years ago. If the all-night sun were a psychic's reading, it's one that shrugs, they're there, but they're doing their own thing in separate rooms right now and they're not really wanting to talk. If the all-night sun were a dress, it's black with white fabric roses around the neckline that you can twist when you're nervous. And then the flowers, they self-replicate and grow larger when your voice trembles. And soon that you are only a décolletage of white fabric roses that grows up around your head and conceals your face. If the all-night sun were a chair, it's broken. If it were a moon, it's a sliver, and you're looking for its other parts on the grass. If it's a pond, there's a whale inside it, singing its mournful song and never hearing any echoey answer back. If the all-night sun were a friendship, it's the kind that sits in a photo under a magnetic frame on your fridge and surprises your friends years later when they come to visit. If the all-night sun were a gift, it would be received with, you don't just give someone a rabbit. You need to check first to ask if they want a rabbit, and then it would be possibly rehomed / possibly adored, best pet forever. If the all-night sun were a thread, it's a lifeline. If it's an article of clothing, it's a life vest. It's no day cruise out of Tampa, I can tell you that. And if the all-night sun were a piece of pottery, it's broken, repaired with gold. There are Japanese artists that mend broken pottery with gold as a way of showing that a thing or a person is made more precious by the wounds it has suffered. Here is a vial of very fine gold glitter. I like to throw that shit on everything. That's it.
Wow, thank you so much, Diane.
Thank you.
And listen, I'm sure those of you that are checking this out, I feel like I felt the positive psychic force of dozens, if not hundreds of people rushing to order this from the Potter's House link, which you should definitely do. But if that doesn't tee up the novel properly, I don't know what could. The evocative words, the use of language, the real connection with earth, and deep personal feelings. One of the things I love best about my role is not only being able to talk to writers a lot and read more books, but perhaps have the opportunity to read books that I might not have been aware of otherwise. And so I feel like it was a real blessing to have the opportunity to really do a deep dive on this novel. And for those that have read it, I think some of these questions will really help make you understand the person behind the pages. But I think these questions will certainly tee up a real interest in wanting to read the book. So Diane, let's jump in and really talk about what goes on, what you've achieved here, and there's a lot of on a lot of levels. There's a lot of achievement, but I think the recurring theme of Swedish folklore haunts this novel, and I'm curious, it kind of chicken and egg. What came first, the location or the story? This invocation of old tales and myths as a literary device. How did that kind of crystallize in your conception?
Okay, so the first thing I thought I'd share is that this book came to me in a dream. It's never happened since, so I can say that without sounding crazy. It only happened the one time. But I woke up one morning and I rushed to my computer and I quickly sketched out 20 chapters of what I thought was going to become this book. And, the dream was there were two women on a train going through Europe, and the train stops in Paris. And one of the women gets off and goes down into an underground bathroom that's full of art on the walls. And in walks an ex-lover. And she has to decide whether or not to stay with the lover or get back on the train with her friend and continue her journey. And that is pretty much all that's the same about the book from that dream. People who have read it, they can identify the friend, they can identify the woman, they know the train, maybe the feel of the train that they're on in certain parts of the book. They know the ex-lover, who that character turns out to be. And maybe they recognize the feeling of having to make a choice between two parts of yourself, this two-parted journey. But again, like the feeling of that dream is in the book, not so much anything else. And right away, when I started writing this, when I had my outline, I said, okay, here we go, let's write this book. Paris became Stockholm because I'd never been to Paris before, but Stockholm was a city of my heart. I loved that city. And I remembered really quickly being there during a period of deep mourning. And that's when the whole book opened up for me. And I knew it was going to have to be a book about grief as I had experienced it as a young woman on my own at midsummer of all times in Sweden. That's when everything blew open for me. And that outline, though it showed me and told me you can write a book from beginning to end that is similar to the story that you want to tell. It gave me confidence, but I was able to set it aside and just say, I'm writing from a place of deep knowledge of a certain kind of grief.
Yeah, and we've talked now. We've talked twice, and I've told you how it's so obvious. I don't think it's obvious. It's the artistry is sufficiently successful that this does not read like, oh, clearly this happened to this author. But there's an obvious lived experience and wisdom of this grief. So the discussion of deep feelings feels very lived in, and the reader, I think, immediately trusts that. But I love the way that the book is so full of these dichotomies that don't feel forced. The notion of the all-night sun, the midsummer, but it's a very dark book in a lot of ways. And so you have this grief and this darkness of this protagonist in a very beautiful environment, and the irony of this partying atmosphere with people younger than her and what she's going through. But there's also, a very savvy and artful kind of these invocations of these Swedish myths and folklore. I think about Naken and some of the things that recur. Maybe talk a little bit about, when you started to realize, like, as a literary device, because again, it's so effective and it's so consistent, obviously, kind of historically with the setting. But it really works as a literary device too. And I'm curious when that really clicked for you and how you were able to weave that through the narrative.
Right. And I don't know if I ever even consciously thought of it as a device. I thought that whenever I was meeting those elements of Swedish mythology and folklore, in my conversations with Swedish friends, in my reading. I won't say research because I don't think I did research in the traditional sense, but it was many, many years of conversation and following threads when I felt pulled by them. But there's a lot of instances of Swedish mythology and folklore in the book. There's Naken, the person that you mentioned. He's a water spirit who lures unassuming young women to him as he plays his fiddle out on a rock in the middle of the lake, naked, and they can't resist his song. There's Baka Hostin, the brook horse that I mentioned in the monkey bicycle piece. Very similar idea, people can't resist, and then before you know it, they're at the bottom of the lake. There's the Skogsra, the woman who lures men into the forest, and she is in essence a hollow tree if you see her from the back, and she's just full of dead leaves and rot. But every time I found out another one of these stories, I felt like I was meeting it, and it was telling me a new way that I could talk about grief. It was like the country, the folklore of the country was meeting me and saying that it understood me somehow, and it let me connect with it. So yeah, there's so many instances of it where it wasn't so much that I saw it and heard it and said, I can use that, but more it was like, yeah, that really feels like grief to me.
Yeah, and clearly the book on a very direct level deals with grief, but I think it is also informed by grief. And maybe that's kind of what I'm getting at when I talk about kind of this, what I mean when I say this kind of lived experience and authority. And this notion of a narrator that is revealing things that she's coming to understand or feel as she's experiencing them. And I know from talking to you that, and I don't know I think this is an interesting, sidebar, that this book was not a short time of conception. This was a labor of love for many years. Maybe talk a little bit about, how and why the book came together, and it didn't come together necessarily quickly. Not that there's anything wrong with that, obviously, but I think there's something to that. And I guess it makes sense to me, having read the book, that it doesn't feel like, I don't know what a book that was written in 6 months would feel like if it's done well, but this book feels like it was labored over, and attention to detail and so forth.
Yeah, I never really felt any mad rush to finish it. I felt like I was working through something. I, of course, wanted to get it published, but it was more the doing of it, the being inside it and spending so much time with those feelings and revisiting feelings of grief that was allowing me to process something, I think. But you're right, this had a long journey. And we're talking probably 13 years since I had that dream, And we actually sold it for the first time about 4 years ago to another publishing house. And at that time, it was a slightly different book. When it was first acquired, that editor, saw things, exactly the same way I did, and we were working on edits, and she was very quickly taken to another publishing house. And so my contract remained with the first publisher, and I was reassigned to another editor who did not see things the same way I did, or that other editor did. And so there was a little bit of back and forth. There was a question that she posed to me. She said, I really like the story, but what if we wrote it linearly from beginning to end without going back and forth in time? And you've read the book. I've spoken to a lot of people who say it's the back and forth that feels like grief. It's the energy, right? It's the walking down the street and you were triggered by a memory and then you were in it, no matter where you are. And that's what I was trying to put on the page. But making it linear took away a lot of that momentum. It took a lot of that feeling away, but I did it because I wanted to show that I was a team player and I was going to try to make this work. And it didn't happen. And she canceled the book.
Wow.
And so
that could be a whole, and probably should be. So we'll talk more. But yeah. The idea of sticking to your vision and reconciling the best meant advice with your own convictions for whatever it's worth, I've written a memoir about grief, and I realized pretty early on, and I wonder how much, whether it's this editor or any reader that would agree with that editor, grief is processed in a nonlinear way because
Yes.
you're remembering something and you're still living. So I realized writing my memoir that it had to be jumping all around time, because that's how the mind deals with, it's almost like a strategy to cope with this intense grief. You're living at 1 minute as a 5-year-old and imagining what your life's going to be like as a 60-year-old and so forth. So I don't think, frankly, I don't think that's why your book resonated with me, but it's interesting to hear you talk about your rationale, because I also kind of arrived at that organically, this notion of how do we describe grief? And there's nothing linear about grief. So, but I also think just as a straight, straight literature, it was a very wise choice. And I'm glad that you stuck to your guns on that, because I think the book would have been fine otherwise, but it's much richer and more devastating having the shifts.
Yeah, yeah. And, thank goodness it got canceled, because I was in a position where I'd gotten so close that I may have allowed the book to go forward that way, And so taking it back, spending more time with it, and I thought that once I had it back in my hands, I'd be able to refashion it just the way that I wanted it back again. But it took me another 14 months to even begin working on it again. I was so devastated, but once I got back to it, and I was able to reclaim this idea of, this is how I experience grief. This is how I want to tell it on the page. It was such a strong moment for me. That was a gift to me from that editor. I didn't fight for that. It was given to me for sure.
Yeah, and we talked about this a little bit in the 1455 interview, which you can check out at 1455's YouTube page. And we talk a little bit about this whole idea of perseverance and faith in one's self. I think for those of you watching right now, for readers, it's always good to understand that these things are seldom simple, easy, or quick. And especially for younger writers, I think Diane and I would both agree, we say this not with any cynicism or darkness, but rather with enthusiasm and encouragement. You do have to stick to what you believe in, as well as accommodate opinions and insights from experts. But there are very seldom a quick, easy path. And there's usually a moment of truth where the writer recognizes that for them to feel good about themselves and the project, if you feel good about it, that's more important than anything else, because you have to live with this achievement once it's out into the world.
Mm-hmm.
So congratulations for sticking to that. And I think it's safe to say at this point that your integrity has been validated by the response and the reception that the book received.
Thank you.
So let's talk a little bit more about, I think you just masterfully use symbols and metaphors without it ever feeling forced or rushed. And the idea of, we already kind of talked about the light, dark discord, but also the notion of how water typically, certainly as a metaphor is, rejuvenating in life. And yet water in this narrative is invoked both literally and metaphorically with death. I don't know if you care to comment on that, but I certainly want to point out your use of water throughout has a lot of foreboding and a lot of sinister elements. And to be able to pull that off is a pretty remarkable achievement, I think.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I knew right away that I wanted the parents of Lauren. Like when we first meet Lauren, she's lost her parents in a terrible accident. They've gone off a bridge into the water. And that really became the first instance, I think, of water metaphor in the book. And then it just kept rising up to meet me over and over again. There's Näcken, and then there's the brook horse, of course, that kind of parallel that in Swedish folklore. But there's other instances too that I really love meeting on the page again. When she's walking through the Alvar with Magnus on a night, and they're on the island, and they're surrounded by water, and he notices lines on the ground and he can tell her that it's because of the rain is showing her. The rain came and then it receded, and it's showing the old ancient roads that used to be there in those fields. I just loved using water to talk about the dark stuff, but also, the really beautiful, meaningful things that they were finding along the way. It was just omnipresent.
So and talk a little bit more about your own process, artistically, because obviously you've shared with us that there has been grief, and there is the impetus of your own kind of grappling with personal grief. How you work through that artistically. I mean, I've talked about and I've read a lot about, and I'm curious if you agree that a lot of writers tend to concur that the time to write about grief is seldom in the immediate aftermath, because as humans, never mind artists, we need time to process and make sense of what we're going through. What was that process like for you? And at what point did you know, I'm going to write about this, and it might take a while? Or was it just a dream and it followed out of that?
No, I was, I think I mentioned this to you in another interview that we did together recently, but, when I was in my MFA program, okay, I was, in my year, I was like the only female student. And at that point, like a lot of the female teachers had left. So I was, in a classroom, all male teachers, lots of male energy. And a lot of the things
That's a
I
nice way
wanted,
to put it.
yeah, we'll call it that. And a lot of the things that I wanted to write about were not being received in positive ways. And so really quickly, my voice became much more cynical and sarcastic, and I was making lots of little jokey things. I had a lot of artifice in my work, which had never been there before I got to that program. And there were certain things that were like definite positives for sure. I had always been a very inventive writer, and they were like praising that. So all of that got really amped up, but I was this version of myself that I was not when I came to that program. And so on my graduation day from my MFA program, my mother passed away. And it took me a long time to start writing again after that. I mean, I was 24, and I thought, I'm graduating. I had a vision of how I was going to start publishing. I knew like the places I was going to send my stuff to. I had an idea for a book, another book that's in the drawer right now. But, I was poised. I was ready to begin this life as a writer. And every time I sat down to write anything after that, even if it was trying to be something funny or an essay, it would always veer off into this other storyland of loss and grief and losing a parent. I just kept telling that story over and over. And I tried to write it as memoir. I tried to write it as poetry. I was trying lots of things on over the years. But I think when I was given that dream, and I was able to have a different structure, fiction, to embody it, where I could live inside a fictional world and tell this story. And that's when I was able to bring it to fruition, make it happen finally. And, I'm 46. Like, I thought I was poised to start my literary career at 24. It was a really long road to get here. But, when I started writing the kind of stories I needed to tell, I didn't want any sarcasm, any cynicism, any artifice, any real sort of put on inventiveness near my work anymore. And my writing now is much different than it would have been if I had published then. Now I feel like it is fully my voice, and I can really rejoice in that.
As well you should. And I think that ties back to this, my somewhat inelegant, but my talking about this experience, this felt experience that is so, well conveyed throughout the narrative. Congratulations, by the way, for surviving your MFA experience. And I would say that in all the best ways, and without even trying to take a shot at MFA, which I support, any hothouse for creativity is all good in my eyes. But this does not read like an MFA fiction piece in any way. And I think that's all to the better, particularly for the subject matter. So I'm curious a little bit about how did you, what didn't work for you trying to grapple with this as a topic, via memoir, and when it made sense to you? Was it the dream? I guess you already answered this, but was it the dream that made you realize or gave you that opening to, okay, it's got to be fiction? Because I think a lot of people with grief, I shouldn't even say a lot of people, but I think it's a shorter road to go, I can write about this
Yeah.
unvarnished, be a memoir. I think your story, I don't know what it would have looked like as memoir, but it's certainly because of the things we've already discussed with the folklore and the beautiful symbolism and use of metaphor is very deep and rich and universal. But talk a little bit about why it didn't work for you or how it didn't work, pursuing it as memoir.
Yeah, I think, when Lauren, my main character in this book, talks about grief, she's speaking in my voice. And there are some people who cannot handle that voice. And there were a lot of people in my real life, when I found myself as an adult orphan at 24, no friends, family surrounding me, who didn't know what to do with me, and I would reach out and they would let me down in different ways, or I wouldn't meet their expectations about where I was supposed to be on that grief continuum. Like, you should have already been at this stage of grief. Why are you still in this place? And so there's a lot of misfirings, a lot of misunderstandings, and I just was not able to make the kind of connections that let me feel supported during that time. It was a really dark time for me. And so maybe it was that I didn't know if a memoir would be received the same way. People have said that Lauren is an unlikable character, and I felt unlikable, and so maybe I didn't trust that my voice was going to be received. Maybe I wasn't brave enough to put myself out there that way. I don't know, but being able to tell it as fiction, it allowed me to love that character, even if no one else was going to love her, and that was really special. I love Lauren, and people who have reached out to me and said, I see myself in Lauren, they love her. And that is enough to me now. There's always going to be people who say, I cannot relate. I get that. But there are other people who have experienced things like I've been through. And, it means something to them. And that means a lot to me.
Yeah, as well it should, and I just want to go back and emphasize for anyone watching, like I love this book on a lot of levels. Yes, my appreciation was augmented by the fact that I also lost a parent, at an intolerably young age. But I don't want that to sound like therefore this resonated. It did, but as a purely literary achievement. It's incredibly powerful. And in fact, I would go so far as to say, I think a book like this is as or more important to somebody that hasn't experienced grief, because it's almost like a gift from someone from the trenches saying, you might have a road to navigate that you have no idea what's coming. And I'm also curious, I'm thinking this in real time, Diane. Coincidentally or not, I do think there's a very American phenomenon of an inability to deal with grief, to talk about grief, to console someone in an honest way without immediately putting up barriers. And the fact that this processing and this catharsis that occurs is overseas, there's probably more than subconsciously and certainly intentionally, but I think maybe even subconsciously, one of the ways it's also effective, right, is being outside of even kind of this Western or this American framework allows for these mythological and some of these otherworldly out-of-body experiences.
It's beautiful. And I think there is something about our culture that doesn't allow us to be out there with grief, and doesn't allow us to take chances to console people in ways that are outside of the norm, and one of the beautiful things about Siri, the Siri character, the student that Lauren befriends, is that she isn't afraid to be present with someone who is in grief. That's what makes her, I think, so special, that she, is willing to listen, that she wants to be that kind of person. And yes, she's all these other complicated and dark and weird things too, but she wants to be a really good listener, and what a gift that is.
For sure, and she's in sharp relief to Lauren's colleagues, who are, again, masterfully, it very subtly, but masterfully, you show the social climbing and the professional backbiting and the envy but also the utter lack of intimacy, the lack of honest connection, and how alone that makes somebody grieving feel. I mean, I think maybe the people, if there are people that have said to you or have felt this character's unlikable, I have to think on some level it's because they haven't experienced that kind of trauma or grief, because there is this almost, again, I do think it's a peculiarly American phenomenon, but this inability to empathize, because it's like, well, I would handle that differently. And it's like, we would never wish ill on anyone, but I think there's almost those of us that have suffered, through grief is like, don't be so sure about that, because you're never prepared. And I think you really draw out the alienation and the isolation, which is just so sad. And I think the Siri character, right, is so enticing and enthralling to Lauren because of what you just mentioned, the lack of guile and the ability to look someone in the eye and say, I'm present with you. I'm able to talk to you and not be uncomfortable. Right. I think we have trouble with that as Americans. We're just trained to shut down as soon as someone gets serious.
Yes. Yeah. And I think there's something about like the magic, the mythology of Sweden that attracts Lauren, to that place, because it's so full of possibility, that there could be more people to hold her in that way,
And without giving, and no spoiler alerts, but yeah, I think that it shows, where hope, especially in a time of crisis or ongoing grief or trauma, hope can be a dangerous thing if one is putting too much faith in other people or other things. And that's yet another kind of sub theme that runs through how much of this mythology and folklore is appealing, because as a grieving individual, Lauren is kind of looking for a way to transcend this kind of narrow space that she can't get out of. And I think that your ability to use kind of these centuries old myths to juxtapose what I said, I think in our Fall for the Book conversation was, the observation was, you are using folklore in a way that doesn't necessarily, for the reader, as a narrative device, is not taking us out of reality, but it's a very effective way of reinforcing these very consistent human behaviors that cross time and geography.
Oh, thank you.
Like, for instance, I think we talked about how a lot of these traditional, myths were presumably written by men, and were intentionally or not kind of favoring a male agency. And your novel shows how both then and now, what the real repercussions of that are for an individual that's, especially for a woman or a vulnerable woman, in these situations, how that can play out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I mentioned that during that talk, but about how, she's there. It's almost a second coming of age for her. She's sort of been stuck in this maybe emotional 18-year-oldness, since the death of her parents. And then she goes there because she's enticed by the idea of shaking off the shell of grief, just being free, during a time in a place with no night, where, night is a really difficult time for her. And she's going to be there during the brightness with this exuberant 18-year-old friend. And maybe she could live out some version of who she was meant to be. And so she gets there, and, if she's on this sort of journey, she's being met by, different creatures from folklore, and they are presenting themselves to her. And she is along the way with agency saying, no, I am not the Skogsra. I am not an evil person who is pulling men in, luring them into their deaths. Even though Magnus, her love interest in the book, asks her point blank, are you that person, in a very flirtatious way, she's able to say, no, I'm not that. What does Santa Lucia have for me? She's able to look at the painting of the brook horse at the end of the book and notice that its hooves have not yet hit the water. She's noticing things. She's taking in an understanding of herself, even as things are being presented to her and offered up to her, saying, are you these?
Yeah, and I think, you know, we talked a little bit tonight, and I know we talked last week about this notion of darkness, and again, both literally and figuratively, like darkness versus the all night sun, you know, the lack of darkness. But the fact that as a writer, you're willing to not shy away from kind of, well, again, the literal, you know, the darkness, but really the darker themes. I mean, of course, grief is going to be enveloped by, there's a darkness associated with that, but I also want to kind of celebrate your bravery in telling a tale that, you know, is set in a different place for the most part, right? It's certainly there's back and forth in America, but we're in a very different place, and an often very dark place with dark situations, and yet the book doesn't feel heavy and doesn't feel especially dark. I wouldn't describe it as a dark book. I describe it as a book that takes a very deep dive, pun intended for those of you who are about to read this, into the darkness. Maybe talk a little bit about like how cognizant were you of, you know, managing that, like without wanting it to be too dark or too, you know, deep.
Yeah, I mean, I was really aware as I was going, like about things like water imagery, and I was thinking, am I using too much water? Like everything's water, but I allowed it because I wanted to see where it was going to take me, and I think that was similar with going dark and deep. I wanted to see, where is this going to take me? If I trust that I have a story that I can tell from an experience that I have lived, you know, how can I best relate that on the page? And, you know, I really, if I'm in a scene and things are not working, or if I'm not getting right at the real truth of the thing I want to say, one thing that I've always done is just take out paper and a pencil, and I set a timer and I go for 10 minutes on that scene, that moment, that feeling of being in that moment. And I might pull from that one or two sentences that feel closer and deeper and, you know, stronger toward what I've been trying to get at. And so, you know, I do that with darkness, but I also was trying to show the real joy of friendship, you know. I felt like I wanted people to see that this friendship between Lauren and Siri, even though it might be seen as inappropriate because they were student and teacher earlier on in the semester, they were right for each other at that moment. They needed each other at that time. And, you know, I wanted people to see the joy of that, of finding someone who will listen, who understands, who connects with you. It's so rare, you know, and it was such a gift for Lauren. And so I wanted to take it all the way joy, you know, in whenever I could, you know. But it definitely took me into different places. For example, when we're talking about grief and Nakin, there is a figure, without giving too much away, there's a figure who comes to visit them on the campground on the fateful night on Midsummer's Eve. And he's dripping with water and he's pockmarked like a sponge. And Lauren starts thinking, is this Nakin come to life? And he wants to take Siri away to go swimming. And she's like, this is this creature, you know? And the darkest I think I got in that scene for me was her realization that she was jealous that Nakin wanted Siri and not her, because she recognized in this man some really, really dark part of herself. And why was he not recognizing that in her? That they were made for each other. That, I think, was the darkest I got during that really, really dark night. That idea of being jealous of something that sinister. So yeah, all the way dark, and let's go all the way joy and see what comes of it.
And why I think it resonates emotionally, you know, we've talked about the literary success and why it works aesthetically, but the emotional satisfaction is what I think you nail, what I know you nail, is this very kind of human vulnerability of at once wanting, striving for the light and all that entails, and having kind of, especially through grief, this irresistible compulsion to kind of wallow in the darkness or welcome oblivion in whatever ways that
Yes.
means, maybe not, you know, literally, but but almost like I just want to not think, and you certainly capture that, which leads me to kind of the $1 million question, right? Like, I want to make sure we're staying in the here and now and celebrating this achievement and this accomplishment, but now that you've kind of presumably exercised artistically and emotionally some of this lived, experience, where's your head at now? Is this a topic and theme that you think you're going to continue to take, a stab at, or is your next project going to be something completely different? Maybe a bit of both.
I think that, having worked on this book almost exclusively for the past 13 years, there's a long line of books behind me that have been waiting for their chance. But they really do all have this in common, like a story of grief, a story of connections missed and met, and also life after loss. I feel like those are the books that I'm really interested in talking about, the stories that I'm really interested in sharing right now. And who knows what's coming years from now. But there's 2 books that I'm working on simultaneously right now, another novel and a memoir. And both of them share those themes. And I don't know if I'll ever shake it all off. I think that maybe these themes are going to be with me forever. But I know there's a lot more stories inside of that to tell.
Yeah, and so first of all, congratulations. I'm as a reader and a fan, I'm really happy to hear that you're not only working on 1 book but 2 books. That's remarkable and inspiring. But also, in case I want to be clear, one should not and need not exercise like, okay, you got the grief out of the way.
Right.
I wasn't implying that. In fact, I think because you have such a handle on this topic, in all the right ways in terms of your ability to explore it and elucidate these deeper kind of inner thoughts, I think it would be a service to a lot of readers if you continue to explore that. So I think that's a win-win. I know we're getting a little bit close. I know you wanted to read another section. I want to make sure we allow you time to do that.
Thank you.
So it's a great time for you to tee up your next reading.
All right. Thank you so much. So for the writers who might be listening, I thought that I would read for you from the acknowledgement section of my book. Someone contacted me via my website and said that it felt like finding a note in a bottle, a message in a bottle from one writer to another. So if you need any of these words tonight, these are for you. And it starts off with, to all who are struggling, who don't know if their voices matter, to the writers and artists who wonder if all they do will forever be invisible, I honor you. To the tellers of stories for which there are no comp titles, the writers of unlikable female narrators, to the misfit writers, the parent writers scribbling after their babies go to sleep, the writers writing in their heads, the writers writing in their cars, that's me. The writers living in their cars, retiree writers who feel too old to start, the young writers whose families tell them it's not practical to continue, the 20-year overnight successes, the poor ones, the sick ones, the baffled, the lost, the marginalized, the slushed, the ones with no writers groups, the ones with destructive writers groups, the ones who want to clear a path for others. I see you and I urge you to keep going. You are not alone. Please believe in yourself even when you don't believe in yourself.
Wow. I read that, as I read, I love hearing it in your voice. And, I think that, well, suffice it to say, I think that proves why this book is coming from such a genuine place. And I think also we've talked a bit about, and actually I think I would love you to elaborate a little bit on this notion of community, right? We talk a lot, well, 1455 certainly is obsessed with this notion of, well, what does community mean? And what is the writing community? What does it mean to be a literary citizen? I think it's sufficiently obvious from this brief conversation that that's something that you're deeply invested in. And certainly your experience at AWP, you genuinely believe in this notion of all of us lifting each other up, both in terms of as human beings, but also as artists. How do you, your acknowledgments pretty much show, but maybe tell us how you kind of think about community and what how you value the role, both the role and the importance of being a literary citizen.
Yeah, I mean, you are not alone, no matter where you are in your writing path. There are people who are 2 steps ahead of you, and there are people who are 2 steps behind you. And you are always in a position where you can seek out help from others and reach out to people who are a little bit further ahead and tell them what you love about their work and connect with them and ask them questions. And you are always in a position where you can reach out behind you and grab someone's hand and take them a few steps further. It is all a continuum. When I was at AWP, one of the best things I did was I started a mentorship program called Writer to Writer. And as you said in the intro, I matched over 600 writers over 12 seasons. And, I would read these applications. I read all the applications. And people at every stage were asking for mentors. We had applications, Sean, from professors at creative writing programs saying, I want to be a mentee. Because maybe they had never had that. They had never had someone who would take them under their wing, show them resources that they needed right now, because every stage has its own new needs, and it's fraught with its new questions. But maybe they never had someone who just said, I see something special in your work, and I think you could benefit from this reading list or this one book or a close read and some affirmation. And so at every level, people need mentors and friends, and those people are out there. When I ran that mentorship program, and it's still going on today and it's doing great, but those mentors were never paid. They all came to me. I always had more than I ever needed because they knew that they wanted to be that person for someone else. Maybe they had that person, but maybe they never did. And those people are out there. And if we can start conversations and be present with writers and community, we can have those conversations and find our families, find our networks. Yeah.
That's so beautifully said. And listen, I want to emphasize, I think, the through line of this event, right, is that Potter's House separately met you and immediately realized they needed to do something, and they reached out to me and said, we have this author, and then they realized I already had an event for Fall for the Book and said, well, this non-starter. I said, oh no, it isn't, because there's more to talk about, and I think I know tonight proves that. But I think what we all, what Potter's House mission is, and I don't even have the audacity. 4055 is a young, growing organization, but Potter's House has the history of doing it. You have the history of doing it, but I think what connects us all, in addition to our love of writing, our love of books, is this understanding, which becomes a conviction, right? Almost like a spiritual mission, that we are part of a community, and we aren't alone, as you said, but also actively proving that by being involved, you're helping others, but you're also helping yourself. And the art is better for it. The world is better for it. And gosh, right now in our current world, we don't need less of this in terms of good, positive community building and celebration of art and artists. We need more of it. And as we come up on the hour, I will just say, I'm old school enough to be, I do believe, as someone that's written a lot of criticism and published a lot of book reviews, the work has to speak for itself, and that we all agree that art has to account for itself. That being said, we're in an era right now where we look back on either contemporary or historic figures that weren't really the best people, and it's complicated, and we're dealing with how we grapple with that. So it's very refreshing when you do encounter an artist who is a wonderful human being, and you want them to succeed, you want to celebrate their work, you want to expose them, but you also want to just feel relieved that there is goodness, and the goodness is always going to win out. So on literary and aesthetic and human levels. It's truly an honor, Diane, to talk to you, to have read your work and really experienced it, and to have the opportunity to talk to you about it. I really appreciate the work you've done. I'm so excited for the work you're continuing to do. And whether you realize it or not, you're going to be part of the 1455 family. So like it or not, you're in now.
Thank you so much. This has been amazing. I appreciate you.
Well, listen, we've filled an hour. I think it's clear we could have done more, but we recorded this, so we're going to make this live on social media. Please support Diane, spread the word, share the link for the video, buy the book. Please use the Potter's House link, support independent bookstores, and be involved. If you're watching now, my two takeaways: buy the book, and you'll thank us for it later. But also support writers. It's a tough time, and a way that we can defeat the darkness is by really celebrating the fact that there are beautiful human beings out there sharing their wisdom and their soul and their spirit and making the world a better place. So I think tonight is a beautiful blow against the darkness, and I think we're all committed to continuing to do that. So Diane, thank you for being here. It's absolutely a pleasure and an honor.
Thank you.
And we'll be hearing more from you soon. And in the meantime, keep writing and be well. And we'll talk more when the time is right.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Potter's House.
Potter's House Lee, thank you so much. We will be continuing to do work together. My final words are for events that are coming up, including another collaboration with the Potter's House. Check us out at 1455litarts.org. All of our programming is free and all are invited. So thank you for being here tonight. We appreciate it. And we'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Good night, everybody.